The Orville New Horizons, Season 3, Episode 6, Twice in a Lifetime. Well, this episode starts with some sort of gathering that Gordon is having, and he's playing his guitar, and he's singing one of the songs that Laura, the woman that he had the interest in back in the 21st century, when he found that cell phone, he was singing one of her songs. After that, the Kalon attack, and they were after that Aronov device. The reason for that is, again, weaponized time travel would be a profoundly bad thing, especially if the Kalons got their hands on such a device. So, in the midst of the fighting, Gordon goes down to the lab where the device is located with the intention of destroying it because the Kalon have them in a tractor beam and they're about to take the ship. Instead, there is an overload from engineering that is designed to break the tractor beam, which it does, but unfortunately for Gordon, it also overloads the Aronoff device, and because he had been thinking about Laura back in the 21st century, he is actually sent back by the device to 21st century Earth. So what happens is Ed and Kelly and the rest of the crew decide that they are going to go back to 21st century Earth and retrieve Gordon. Unfortunately, they get there 10 years too late. Gordon has gotten married and had kids. So what happens is Gordon doesn't want to leave. He is happy. He has a wife. He has kids. He made a life for himself in the 21st century. So the answer on Ed's part is to go back those last 10 years since they missed the window, and they will retrieve Gordon 3 months after he arrives on Earth instead, thus stopping him from getting married and having children.
And during that, when they traveled back and they were not quite far enough back, they used all their dysonium up, and so they had to find a source to refuel their power systems. So there was a side story of Isaac and Ensign Burke looking for dysonium on Earth. And I know you and I have talked about this. I don't understand why they were struggling so much to find dysonium. It was hidden under the crust, because in Season 1, when I did my video on this channel about the Orville technology, it was mentioned a couple of times that dysonium is a fairly common material in the solar system, well, in the galaxy. So what I don't understand is, instead of this little jokey thing about digging in the Earth's crust to get dysonium, even if Earth didn't have any exposed, I assume like on Mars or any of the moons in the solar system, why couldn't the Orville, on their version of impulse power, have gone to Jupiter or whatever? Because you wouldn't need quantum to get there. I mean, impulse should be sufficient to get there, and just get it from there. It's supposed to be this common material. I understand the reason was so they could have this little jokey thing between Isaac and Ensign Burke, but I don't know. I just did that video like 3-4 weeks ago, and then they do this, and it's like, but I researched this, and dysonium is supposed to be common in the galaxy.
Yeah, it was just so that you could have that interaction between Isaac and Burke. I know they were trying to develop Burke's character, but it didn't work for me, mostly because she didn't seem to develop at all. All we got was more of her backstory. So not only was this her friend who was killed by the Kalon, it was a friend she was in love with, and she hadn't told her that she loved her. I mean, that was the big reveal. And it's hilarious because I'd actually said to you before this episode, I bet she's a lesbian. I bet that's exactly where this is going to go, because that's how writing is these days. They're going to make her into a lesbian.
Well, it's not just a lesbian. I don't want to get myself in trouble here. They're making her out to be an angry lesbian.
Yeah.
And that's a really bad stereotype.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we leave this episode, she's still angry with Isaac. Who cares? So what? You're a lesbian. I don't care. I mean, seriously, what does that matter to anything? It doesn't. You know, your friend that you loved is still dead. It doesn't develop your character at all, other than, oh, she's a lesbian. Well, there's some nice identity politics for us.
That person, because if you go to the flashback, in the first episode of this season, there was a flashback to the Kalon battle, and I think her name was Amanda.
It was.
Amanda had to They were in the escape pod, her and Charly Burke, and they were trying to escape because their ship was basically destroyed by the Kalon. The jettison device, I believe, failed. So they would have to manually jettison the escape pod. And one of them would have to do that manually and stay behind. So Amanda volunteered to do that. Well, I guess, if I remember correctly, first Burke said she would do it, but then Amanda said, no, I'll do it. And then so she jettisoned it. The point of that episode, for Burke's character anyway, was that she held resentment for the Kalon, and specifically Isaac, for her friend, crewmate, and now we find out possibly lover.
No, it wasn't a lover. She never told her how she felt.
So it was just a crush.
Yes.
And it didn't add any, like, we already knew that she was upset with Isaac, that a crewmate had to sacrifice themselves so that she could escape. Adding that she was a crush of Charly Burke's doesn't help the story at all, except to throw some identity politics in there. It doesn't help anything. And in fact, you and I were talking after this episode. I give them credit that at least finally they were touching again on why Burke is upset with Isaac. But this should have came like the second episode or third episode in the season, because this didn't work for me at all. They teamed up. Isaac, they gave like those holographic things that Gordon and Ed used to get on that Krill ship in season 1, so they look like Krill. Isaac used one to look like a human, so he looked like the actor who plays Isaac, so he looked human. That was the whole point of this, was Isaac was going to look for Dysonium, and Burke had to come along because somehow there was some complicated thing that had to be done when they're drilling, and only Burke and her 4D visions.
Her Mary Sue power.
Yeah, only that could happen. So that's why these two were teamed up together. Yes, it was like a comedic scene in a biker bar that was kind of funny. But overall, I mean, maybe this makes me a bad person, but the way Isaac had this flat effect on his face as he had that holographic human form, I thought in Orville of a previous season, like season 1 or 2, they would have made some joke about Burke saying, oh, this is my homeschooled brother or my homeschooled boyfriend or some religious cult person. I could see where the South Park people would make fun of a character like that. They missed all the opportunities. The only joke that was made, and it wasn't even a joke, is Burke explained Isaac as her brother. And then that was it. That was the closest to a joke.
And that wasn't a joke. That was just, no, he's not my boyfriend. He's my brother. Because she had to come up with something. I mean, I guess that was supposed to be funny, but it really wasn't. So yeah, complete and utter missed opportunity there. It makes me so angry because this was their opportunity to develop her character, and they failed. Talking about somebody's sexual orientation, that's not developing their character unless they were at Stonewall or something, getting arrested for being gay or something like that.
They gave her another skill because last week, remember, archaeology is a hobby of hers. That's a skill of hers. This week, apparently, she's a lesbian. That's a skill of hers. How does that develop her character? It doesn't do anything to develop her character. We still know she was upset with losing her crewmate, Amanda. The fact that she had a crush on her, that doesn't add anything to it. It really doesn't, unless we find out something more about what they were doing. That's why I mistakenly said, oh, well, that was, her girlfriend. And you're like, no, just somebody she had a crush on, she liked. So it didn't add anything. And I'm at a point now, because in real life, we know that Seth is dating this actress, that you are winning me over. In the first episode, you didn't care for this character at all, Charly Burke. And I said, well, give him time. They'll probably develop this. At this point, it just seems like every episode has Burke in there with many speaking lines at the cost of other more interesting characters. At this point, it is hard for me to ignore the rumor of those two dating. And the only reason Burke is getting all these lines is because she's dating the guy behind the series.
Yeah, I mean, my initial criticism of her, I had no idea that they were dating. I don't pay attention to that kind of crap. The thing that I picked up on was the fact that she was this ensign who apparently had these special abilities. She was gifted. And it's like, what? Why is there a gifted person on the Orville like this? I mean, when it was exposed that John Lamar was smart, that was one thing, he
was hiding it.
Intelligent.
He was hiding that because he didn't want to accept that. I guess growing up, that was considered uncool to be smart. So him being, not that the Orville is this complete garbage scow of a ship, But if we remember the premise of the Orville when it first began, it was a medium-level ship, kind of a forgotten ship that had kind of interesting screw-up people.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, why would they have somebody who openly is gifted, that the Union knows that this person's gifted out of the Union Point? Why would this person be in narrative on the quote-unquote screw-up ship?
Well, and again, in my opinion, there's a difference between being intelligent and capable versus gifted. Because to me, gifted is that whole chosen one trope. And if this is Star Wars, then okie dokie, they're a chosen one. They apparently are destined to be a Jedi because they are strong with the Force. And I don't expect that kind of writing in the Orville, because we hadn't seen that before. She is a first, and that is not a good thing. Which brings us back to this episode. Again, her gift, her special gift, is why she was there with Isaac doing this drilling to get the Dysonium. Yeah, I mean, if they had just left that gifted crap in the first episode and just moved on with her character and written her as a normal character, that would have been one thing. But they haven't. She's still this gifted.
She's Wesley Crusher 2.0.
Yes.
She's female Wesley Crusher.
Oh, God, yeah, she is.
The other story with Gordon, that was actually pretty good. And the actor who played Gordon, he gave a good performance. So that other story with him and his family and having to deal with, basically by Mercer going back even further and undoing all of that time he spent with his family, that was sold pretty well in the drama. There was some good performances there. But that B story with Isaac and Charly Burke, the Isaac stuff was kind of funny. Isaac was playing the straight man pretty well. But Charly Burke, she's an anchor. Any scene she's in now, she's an anchor for me. She does nothing for me. She drags the scene down. She's getting close. She's not the star of this show. But it's like if somebody told me that she was an understudy and learning under the great Michael Burnham, I would believe that, because Michael Burnham, whenever that character's in any scene, stops the whole narrative and drags it to a complete halt. Burke isn't quite that bad yet, but I could see where if you give her another season, she might work up to Michael Burnham status. And that's bad when a character drags the narrative to a halt. So you've won me over. The Charly Burke character needs to go. Her and Seth are dating. They can date outside of the camera. But we don't need to see Charly Burke much anymore. If they're not going to develop her character, then I don't want to see her anymore.
I wish they would just write her out.
She's not that good of an actor. She's at best basic. Because I don't think she's a horrible actor, but she's nothing gifted. She's just basic. It's not like, oh, we've got to keep her in her because she's such a great performer. Yeah, but she's not. She's not one of the better actors on this series. She's toward the other end of the spectrum, and she's one of the worst actors on this series. So why keep giving her lines? I know why.
Well, you know why. Yeah.
But they need to stop with that. This episode overall I did enjoy, but I enjoyed the time dilemma problem. The Charly Burke and Isaac stuff. Isaac talking, I would laugh, then Burke would open her mouth. It would ruin the scene for me. If I rewatch this, I will skip through all the Charly Burke dialogue because it's useless.
But it's definitely worth watching the Gordon parts where he has the family that he has wanted for so long. He's with the woman he fell in love with. It was actually really painful when he's there with his family and Ed has left, and Ed is going back to undo all of it. And I think the thing that I'm not sure quite rang true for me was when they were back in current time for the Orville, and they have explained to Gordon what happened, and he's just telling them, well, you did the right thing. I don't know. I don't know if I could be as magnanimous as Gordon was if somebody told me that that had just happened to me, that I was happy, I had a family, and I told them I didn't want to go. And they took all of that away. I'm not sure that I would be as nice about it. That just was a little bit hollow for me. That Gordon was just like, oh, that's fine. You did the right thing. I don't know. I mean, that just kind of, especially given how hard he's being about Isaac right now. Even after Isaac cut his leg off for that practical joke, even Gordon admitted that was the best practical joke he had ever seen in his life. Now he seems to be very ambivalent about Isaac. There were a few tweaks that they did to his character that I'm not so sure that I agree with. And that is definitely one of them. Because he had a very difficult time letting go of Laura when he fell in love with her just in the simulator. And I'm not so sure he would easily let go of her this time either.
What this kind of reminded me of, just basically, I'm not claiming plagiarism because it's not, but that Next Generation setup where remember when Geordi had that holodeck doctor helping him with getting out of that trap? And then in a later episode, he met that real person and she wasn't anything like what the holodeck character was. Mm-hmm. That's not the case here. And that to me surprised me a bit because I thought what we were going to find out is Gordon fell in love like Geordi did. Was it Leah Brahm? I think that was the character. Geordi fell in love with that character as the computer made the simulation. Mm-hmm. Then when he met her in real life, she was a much different character. I thought maybe a more interesting story would have been to show Gordon when he first landed. And then he waited, I guess, like 3 years before he said, they're not coming for me. I got to form a life. Which, by the way, I don't understand Ed's argument at all. Gordon did wait for a while, like protocol dictated.
Yep.
How is he supposed to eat and survive if he doesn't get a job and try to acclimate into society?
Oh, I know, because I was thinking that same thing. What, was he supposed to just kill himself? Yeah, I mean, seriously.
I think Mercer would say yes, and I disagree with that. But that's some of that Next Generation ethics creeping in that I didn't care for, because there are parts of the Next Generation I do not like, and that's part of it. Their interpretation of the Prime Directive.
Well, in my opinion, okay, so what? He screws up the timeline. So what? He creates an alternate timeline. Whoop-de-friggin-do. Okay, so there's another timeline. Oh, well.
I mentioned the Next Generation Prime Directive ethics. If you take as the spokesperson for that philosophy of the Prime Directive being rigid as Jean-Luc Picard in the 90s, which I think there's a fair statement to make there, what did he allow to happen in this current trash secret hideout with Rios? Mm-hmm. He allowed a Gordon situation to actually happen.
Yep.
And he was the poster child for that interpretation of the Prime Directive in the 90s, where he would be, in the 90s, he would have agreed with Mercer, no, you can't pollute the timeline like that. Whereas now as an old fool, sure, why not? Go ahead. To finish up my thought here, what I was saying. So to me, it would have been interesting. I think a better story for me if they would have showed Gordon waiting for the Orville to show up. And then after the 3 years, moving on, because then after the 3 years is when he decided he was going to look for this lady. And if you would have met her, and she would have been very different than what he was led to believe by, much like Geordi did with the doctor who helped him out of that trap, where she wasn't the same person that she eventually at the end of that episode, that second episode, if I remember, Geordi did come to respect and like her, but he got to know the real her, not her holographic persona.
Yeah.
I thought that might have been an interesting story here, where he would have realized that this lady wasn't really just her social media posts, but there was much more to her than that. Because to me, that would have been an interesting social commentary on today's times, where we follow people on social media, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. We think we know celebrities, we think we know people, but then when you actually spend any real time with them in person, you find out, they're actually quite a bit different than their online persona. So I kind of thought they were going to do that here. They didn't. I thought that was a missed opportunity. But what they did do was good. That story with Gordon, that was well done, even if it was a bit simplistic.
Yeah.
Because we explained basically the whole story. Their performances are what carried this episode, not really any sort of turns in the plot, because it was a pretty A to B type plot.
Yeah, rather simplistic plot, really. But the acting was excellent, at least from most of the characters. The story with Gordon, as I said, aside from at the end where they told him the truth, the story made a lot of sense. So
yeah, it was a good episode.
It was a very good episode.
I don't think it was as good as last week's, The Tale of Two Topas, but it was still pretty good. So I would recommend watching this just for the actor who played Gordon. I didn't think he could act this well. I don't mean that as an insult. I just kind of assumed he was a comedic type guy. But he actually did a good dramatic reading. The actor surprised me he could act this well. So for that performance, I would recommend this episode.
Definitely. Yeah, unless you have anything else.
I was going to mention, this is a side, oh God, he's going down a path. But that fighter that they got in the first episode, that Pterodon, I think it's called, it's just sitting in the shuttle bay. It's sitting in the exact same spot when he landed it in the first episode. And I don't know, maybe it's just me and I'm getting nitpicky, but why? If they're not going to use it right now because they have no use for it, why don't they push it to the back of the shuttle bay? Because it almost seems like shuttles have to go around that thing just to get out into space. So it has nothing to do with the story. It's just when they took off in the shuttle and I saw that pterodon in almost in fact, I think it is the exact same position that he landed at, Gordon did in the first episode. I'm just shaking my head going, okay, I mean, we did see some of those pterodons in the Krill episode where they went to the
Krill homeworld.
Yeah, the Krill homeworld, and Talea was there. But we don't know if the Orville launched their one fighter. In the first episode, I kind of got excited about maybe seeing more of these and how that's going to fit in. They're not doing anything with this. They just, in that first episode, they just added it as eye candy. I just thought I would mention that. It was funny because they show the shuttle bay. Now, I at least give them continuity credit that they're showing that ship in the shuttle bay, but it's just sitting there like kind of in the way of things. It's just, I don't know, it has nothing to do with anything. It's just kind of one of those OCD moments where I'm like, what's going on here?
Well, we'll see if before the end of the season they actually get that thing out and use it. My prediction is it'll happen in the last episode of the season, but we'll see. Maybe not, because the whole COVID thing, they weren't able to make all the episodes they had intended. So for all we know, it might just sit there in the shuttle bay in perpetuity.
I would rather watch that ship sitting in the shuttle bay doing nothing than any more Charly Burke.
I'll give you that. All right, well, I would love to hear everybody else's thoughts on this episode. Like, subscribe, definitely comment. Thanks for watching.
Take care.